Right. Yeah, I should line that up first. So here we are. This is the second of only two of the videos I'm going to do for week 5. And this one, it may seem a little bit off the wall. You know, the concept of this week of step 4 is this idea of research skills. That's well and good, but I think we can kind of bring in some other thoughts on this. The search for the truth, the idea of critical thinking, kind of the crux of both the information credibility worksheet, which I don't know that I brought that up in the last video, did I? I think not. So I was going to go, there's no tech time today, but I lied. Let me bring up that worksheet just so we can take a look at it real quick. But it goes along with that discussion board about the social dilemma and all the things in the world that are, that's not what I wanted, kind of impacting our ability, not just research, but to see what's going on and understand why. I mean, yes, the world's a complicated place, but it sure seems like of late it's become incomprehensible, maybe the right word. It just seems like things are crazy and just getting worse. So that's kind of why I put these slides together. And I'm going to try really hard not to go off on any tangents. You're going to, my opinion will probably be fairly clear, but I'm not trying to sway you to think what I think. I want you to just think. Think about what's going on out there, and I hope some of these slides will get you to do that. And it shouldn't be too long as long as I keep it, keep myself constrained. Right, so here's the information credibility worksheet. And again, it's sort of like the ethical dilemma that you go out and find a definition, right, and cite it. Those were good. I mean, just something like that, where you got it from. Okay, simple as that. It's good practice for citing. Then define media literacy. That was in a previous slideshow, but I want you to go out and find one that works best for you. And I think you're going to find one that says that access, analyze, evaluate as part of the definition. But the reason that is important, media literacy, is because we are surrounded by media, and not just TV, radio, but social media and our phones. I mean, it's like 24/7 now. Okay? In your own words, define information credibility. Okay? So tell me what you think that means. And then this worksheet probably will take you the longest of any of them, just because there's quite a few to look at. And so what I want you to do is go to each of these websites just for a couple of minutes. So the New York Times, the New York Post, and what it says up here, decide which are credible and which are not. Okay, and then tell me why you think that. So take a look at the New York Times website. Click around a little bit on some of the articles, and then tell me what you think as far as credible, not credible. And what goes into that, beyond just what you read, understand the New York Times, just as an example, has been around an awfully long time. Now, longevity doesn't always mean credibility, but a newspaper that publishes a bunch of BS is probably not going to stay around very long unless it's the National Enquirer and they're selling it at the grocery counter, right? And so that's the idea. The New York Post, that's another newspaper out of New York. These two are very different from each other. So take a look. The next one, Drudge Report. That's a website. Matt Drudge puts it together. Take a look at that. And really, if you just Google these, it'll probably be the very first thing that comes up. Fox News, you can go to their website, but if you're a viewer of, or even just an occasional viewer of Fox News, give me what you think about it. Same with CNN. So I put 2 of the 24-hour, I've already said it, propaganda channels on there. And you may agree, you may disagree. That's fine. You may think Fox is spot on, fair and balanced. Personally, I think it's neither of those things, but neither is CNN. Okay? YouTube, you guys know what that is. Credible? Some of these might be yes and no answers, that some things are, some things aren't. Wikipedia, you're familiar with. This website a lot of folks don't know about, but I've plugged it into, harped on, at least talked about it a couple times in previous videos. Factcheck.org. Go see what that looks like. Twitter, Facebook, and here's another one you may have not ever heard of, Snopes. So go ahead and just look it up and see what Snopes is all about. Sounds kind of goofy, doesn't it? Maybe it's not. And then the last thing I want you to answer, and look, I know there's not a lot of space left, um, so just type in, and if it expands and goes to 2 pages, so be it. That's fine. Right? So this one, are you media literate? Okay, that's probably going to be a yes, no, maybe, but why or why not? That should be a couple sentences worth. So go back to the definition, and then look at that and go, am I? Do I do those things? So there's your information credibility worksheet, one of the longer ones. But again, at this point, we're beyond the halfway mark too, so I expect some good collegiate level thinking answers on the paper, not 2-word answers. New York Times, yes, credible. Why? Just because. That ain't gonna cut it, right? So, I can't not ever stop doing tech time. So this idea is search for truth. Some words of the day, some concepts maybe you've never heard of. And I'll try to wrap it up on a high note, because remember the discussion about skeptic versus cynic. Skeptic, a questioning attitude. I don't think that's right. I'm going to dig into it more. And not everything needs that. But if it's something important, remember that idea, something you're interested in, then do it. And avoid, and I'm trying very hard, and you'll see probably in these slides, there's a hint of cynicism that it just seems like we're going down this path of further and further polarization. And the country is really has the potential, at least, to come unglued. And we saw a hint of that on January 6th. Right. So let's just jump into slideshow mode. I do have a couple of Blue Star videos. Watch them, don't. I'm not going to plug them in here. But I think if you even watch a portion of one of the longer ones, you'll be amazed, and not in a good way. Words of the day. We're going to talk a bit about American culture and what that is. What makes up American culture? So to understand it, here's the definition. Sounds a little bit like morals and ethics too, doesn't it? Ethics, that kind of social construct of what's right and wrong, what's acceptable and what's not. Same idea. Beliefs, social forms, race, religions. So culture is an amalgamation. It's a melting pot of all these different things. Because look around the United States. Unless you're a Native American, you're an immigrant in some form or fashion. Somebody came here. So we all bring those customs, beliefs from the home country. And we kind of develop this, shared attitudes, values, goals. Now that doesn't mean we're uniform across the board. Everybody has different attitudes, values, goals. But as a whole, the culture kind of moves in a similar direction. That we believe life, liberty, pursuit of happiness are noble and lofty ideals. That we believe, at least most of us, that all men are created equal. And now, of course, that means men in a generic sense. All men, all women. Opportunity, right? Isn't that what's supposed to be the United States, the land of opportunity? You work hard, you get where you're going. I don't mean that to be preachy. It's kind of, that's, if you want to call it a culture, that's us. Fact, actual existence. Why do we even have to define that? Well, look around. Look what passes as fact nowadays. Information, objective reality. Remember, objective, as opposed to subjective, subject to the person. Objective fact, subjective opinion. Nothing wrong with that as long as you don't mix the two or try to present your opinion as fact. Look, this may sound kind of corny, but there's a huge difference between saying I think versus it is. It is, you're talking about fact. And now when you say, you take your opinion and say it is, I say, you're doing it wrong, Anderson Cooper, Bill O'Reilly. And this kind of goes on that same kind of thing. Truth, real things, events, facts, provable things. Question, do facts change? Because you look at that, actual existence, objective reality. Can facts change? And the answer is yes. How? Well, how? Well, go back. It wasn't universal, but there was an idea back at the age of discovery before that if you sailed too far, boo, you fell off the edge of the earth. Right? The flat earthers, which there's some still out there. Good Lord. Medical research. Tobacco was a big product in the early colonies of America. Made a lot of money. Heck, it did it all the way up and through the mid 1960s. And then finally it got found out that the tobacco industry knew it was addictive and knew it was very bad for you. And they'd been hiding that. And that finally came out and they were taken to court by the 1980s. Okay? So things can change. Scientific research, breakthroughs, new evidence is found. Right? Accepted as true. So fact and truth kind of go together, don't they? And look, you may disagree with me. That's fine. But there's no such thing as alternative facts. It's a fact or it's not. So half-truth, spin, lies, yes, there's those things. That's what I would call alternative facts. They're bullshit. All right, pardon my French. What was her name? Trump's press secretary. No, so-and-so presented alternative facts. Yeah, he lied. Couple more, and I'll get back to the Blue Star video here in a minute. This idea is kind of a philosophical approach, believe it or not, from a woman named Ayn Rand, who is a pretty renowned author. The Fountainhead was probably her most famous book. There's two ideas to this. Theories, the validity, blah. Boy, that sounds like philosophy, doesn't it? Subjective experience. But here's what I wanted to talk about. It's a philosophy, a doctrine, a way of thinking that individual self-interest is all that matters. I call it the selfishness theory, and that may be oversimplified, but that was kind of her idea, and quite a few people in Congress kind of follow this idea, that unfettered self-interest, unfettered selfishness will get us to the best result for our entire culture. Now, there's a grain of rationality in that if we all act in our own best interest, if we all have self-discipline and work hard for ourselves, that produces a better culture, a better society, perhaps. But if all it is we're all greedy and selfish and trying to grab the brass ring individually, then maybe that might produce us stepping on someone else or lying about somebody else or doing something unethical to get there. And so this kind of taken hold objectivism idea, I think, has gone too far, because as a culture, as a country, yes, we're a bunch of individuals, but look, if the ship of the United States hits the rocks and goes down, we all go with it. So there's a collective piece. And I'm not talking about socialism, communism, any of this stuff that half the folks that spout it couldn't even define it. But yeah, some of this stuff ticks me off a little bit, right? So here's a little thought bubble, a thought experiment. You know what unemployment is, right? There's an unemployment number that gets published every month, and it's kind of part of the economic health of the country. Unemployment's going up, unemployment's going down. And I'll dig into that a little bit more as we try to understand how our economy works here in a little bit. But unemployment, you would say, I don't have a job, I'm unemployed, right? I would too. I mean, that makes sense. It's intuitive. But what's the government's definition of unemployment? If you are unemployed, here's the criteria you have to meet. Jobless, but have looked for work in the last month. And you're available to work. You're not laid up, you don't have an injury, something like that. So you don't have a job, but you've been looking for one. That means you're unemployed. Okay, fair enough. So if I'm without a job, but I haven't looked for the last month, let's say I haven't looked for a couple months, that the job market's not too good, and I haven't looked, you're not counted as unemployed. I don't have a job, I just haven't looked for a couple months. Doesn't that seem odd? So you have to know the definition of what's going on to understand what the word really means. So unemployment rate, about 8%. This was, it's now down to 5. So over the last year or so, as we came out of COVID, that 8% was the highest since World War II, and now it's come down a little bit. I want to say it was 5.4. I'd have to look up the last monthly numbers. Okay? So, is unemployment number a fact? Yes, as long as you understand the definition behind it. You're unemployed if you don't have a job and you've been looking for one. If you're not looking for one, you're not unemployed, even though you don't have a job. Right? Confusing, huh? So, one more, just kind of isn't in this thought bubble. How could I make the unemployment rate 0 tomorrow? Say everybody stop looking for work. You don't have a job, but stop looking. Now, by that definition, the unemployment rate's 0. Is there a better number like 17%? Probably, because the idea of actually not having a job. Get rid of the looking for work or not piece, or maybe make it a longer window of time. But the number's higher than what you typically see. That doesn't mean it's wrong. You just have to understand the definition behind the number. I hope that makes sense. And just one more thought on this. Oftentimes you'll hear, hey, the Dow Industrial Average was up 200 points, or the NASDAQ was up 100 points today. Is the stock market a measure of the U.S. economy? It's certainly put forward as such, but it's really only one small piece of the overall U.S. economy. So is the unemployment rate, joblessness, inflation. There's a whole lot that goes to it. And I don't know if it's human nature, maybe, but we tend to oversimplify things. It makes them easier to comprehend, I guess. All right, so back to the blue star at the top. If you've never looked at this, it's just a single page on the web. It's called the U.S. Debt Clock. And what it is it's a computer program, but it actually reflects real close what the U.S. owes, what our credit card bill is. You know what? I wonder, since this isn't really a video, let's see what happens. I hope I don't get a copyright violation when they pull this. But I want you to see what it looks like. So there's the U.S. Debt Clock. Let me move it over here so you can actually see it. How about that? Boom, ba-da-boom, ba-da-boom. The cool thing about this website, and whoever designed it, it was really smart, is as you move the cursor around, see how as I change boxes, up in the center, the explanation of what you're looking at changes. So that idea of unemployment would be explained up there. That's beautiful. And you can see the sources, U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, the banking industry, and Treasury. Okay, so look at this. Our U.S. national debt is rapidly approaching $30 trillion. Trillion with a T. Okay, so every citizen in this country has a credit card debt. If you had a kid tomorrow, he or she would come into the world owing about $87,000, because that's what it would take for each of us to zero out this debt. And just look how fast the numbers are going up. I mean, that's over $10,000 a second. Okay. The other thing, take some time, look around this, just see what's on here. Two other quick things to look at. One is the big ticket items, as I call them. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, wars are expensive. And then interest on the debt, because we have to borrow money to pay this debt. So that means we're borrowing money. That means we're paying interest on that almost 30 trillion. Look how much that interest is. That's million, billion, 416. That's almost, it's approaching at least $500 billion. $416 billion in interest. That's it. Okay, so take a look at this. I find it kind of frighteningly fascinating. Does that sound right? How can we keep operating as a country with nearly $30 trillion in debt? If you did that as an individual, if you don't pay your bills, what happens? They shut off your power, they come take your car. Well, it seems like only the U.S. government could get away with this, and they have to keep borrowing to make it happen. Right? So kind of walk with me on this path. Can we get the truth? Lord, I hope so. Morals, ethics, and culture. Kind of set the stage with those definitions. Have we had a really unified culture? No, it's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different ones. Look at the big cities. You have Little Italy, Chinatown. Different areas. When people emigrated to the United States, they tended to conglomerate around people that came from the home country. Nothing wrong with that. But in the past, at least, and this may be a bit overstated, but even though there was the Little Italies and Chinatowns, there was still a piece of becoming an American. They left the old world or the home country to come here because they wanted to start anew, and they didn't want to be defined by some of the cultural constraints of the old country. Okay? So maybe that's a unifying piece, that we're all kind of immigrants from somewhere else trying to make the best country we can, right? in order to form a more perfect union. You go back, even the original 13 colonies were very different. They were founded for different reasons. They were run in different manners. They had different religious vectors, right? The Puritans more in the New England area, Protestantism more in the central, and even like what was it, Maryland opened its doors to Catholicism to try to get more people to come in, right? The beginnings of religious toleration. What did we have? That bond that we're all Americans. We're all kind of in this together. And if we act like that, we'll probably get a better outcome for all of us together, right? Oh, come on, baby. There we go. Yeah, now we're far from perfect. All men created equal, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That was directed at a certain group, really wealthy white landowning men initially. But again, I've mentioned this before. People can try to throw the founders under the bus, say the Constitution is, soaked in blood. But I think honestly, they knew they were men of their time, but they were really smart too. So they put that up on the wall and they said, look, we want to get there. We want this country to get better and better and better. And just read the preamble of the Constitution. It says as much, right? So we've been working on that. Ending slavery, a war, 620,000 casualties to end the institution of making other human beings machines. Women's rights, minority rights. So we've taken steps forward. Now, it is the fact that the U.S. will take 2 steps forward and a step and a half back, or 3 steps back and then a step forward. So we kind of lurch our way. It's not that smooth glide path that the founders maybe were hoping for, but we try. That's kind of part of our DNA in this country, is to try to improve things, at least up until recently, it seems like. So what did unify the country? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Those actually came from much more ancient writings, if you will. Guys named Hobbes and Locke, about life, liberty, property, the original idea. Rugged individualism. Be responsible for yourself. Personal freedoms, yes, but personal responsibilities. And if you think about the First Amendment, right, freedom of the press. People say freedom of religion. That's close enough, I guess. But the U.S. will not establish nor prohibit any religion, is what it really says. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition the government if you don't like what's going on. But we also have responsibilities. One of those is to get out and vote. Right? And we're going to come back to one of the pieces, freedom of speech, here in a minute. Abraham Lincoln, one of my heroes, right? His idea, why he wasn't an abolitionist, but he disliked the institution of slavery because it went against that idea, that you should, in this country, earn your living from the sweat of your own brow, not from the sweat of 100 slaves out in the field doing the work, okay? And another piece, just as an aside, as a younger man, he worked in all kinds of odd jobs for a while. But he worked on the Mississippi, and he saw barges full of black men heading south to New Orleans to be sold into slavery. And the look on their faces, that abject despair, stuck with Lincoln for the rest of his life. Right? And there's a concept, we seem to quantify it in movies, right? TV shows maybe, that truth and honor always wins out. And that's a nice, noble thought, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't always win out. What's the saying? All it takes for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. I see a lot of good men doing nothing all of a sudden. Maybe because I'm getting old, I don't know. But if I look to Washington, D.C., I don't see a whole lot of anything getting done. One of the cultural changes, and again, this is just so we understand kind of the background, that the country's not perfect, but we should be striving to get better. There was a slow change in the idea of American culture. After World War II, this idea of the American dream really moved from those ideals in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, to more about actual tangible stuff, right? The house with a white picket fence, 2.4 kids and a dog, right? And honestly, through World War II, a common enemy, right, fighting against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, can unite a nation. Absolutely. We saw that for a short period after 9/11, but it dissolved pretty rapidly. So the so-called American dream ideals became things. And you still hear it today, the echoes of the 1950s. Right on the radio, you hear these, home mortgage advertisements. Seek the American dream. Go out and grab your American dream, home ownership. Look, it's nice to have a roof over your head and put some money, invest some money into an asset that's going to appreciate. I don't know that home ownership has anything to do with the American dream, at least in my mind. And so the evolution or devolution of this, I'd ask, what do you say? What is the American dream? And I do this with my history classes. I do it with all the classes. When we're face to face, I get the answer. Almost all the time with the history classes, because you're talking about 17, 18-year-olds, is they say the American dream is making money. And oftentimes I get a little caveat to that. It's not just making money, it's making as much money as I can, as quick as I can, with the least amount of effort as I can. And now that's not universal, but you can get that vibe out of some of the answers, right? Look, making money, there's nothing wrong with that. But to me, it's how you do it. If you invent the next greatest mousetrap and everybody likes it and they buy it and you make some money, wonderful. But if you're unethical and you lie about emissions tests to make more money for your company, that's wrong. That's not alternative facts. It's a lie. It's criminal. Right? So I guess try to balance that. To me, if I had, secret powers, I would try to get people to, okay, yeah, I need to pay the bills. I need to keep a roof over my head. It's nice to go have fun once in a while. But let's focus back less on stuff and money and more on what unites us as opposed to what divides us. And it seems like today, politics, everything is political. Heck, this morning, I read it, today's the 4th of November. Tennessee is this close to signing into law a thing that's going to make school board candidates list their party, Republican or Democrat. Boy, that's just what we need, isn't it? More polarization over politics. We've seen what's going on at some of these school board meetings. People coming out and threatening folks in the parking lot. We know where you live. We're going to get you. People threatening their kids. Yeah, I said I wasn't going to go off on a tangent. I just did. So enter the fear of other people and objectivism. So maybe not a bad segue, really. Remember that selfishness doctrine of objectivism. We see this, and this isn't unique to the Cold War. There was a fear of others back in the mid-late 1800s that we said the Chinese are responsible for this economic collapse when really it was the overdevelopment of railroads. But we blamed them and then said, you can't come to this country for the next 20 years. And then we extended it out till the 1940s, right? So there has been that kind of xenophobia is the word, fear of other people, fear of immigrants. But we see it again develop in our lifetimes, really, or the culmination is in our lifetimes. The Second Red Scare, fear of communism, the Soviet Union after World War II as a world power. And then you move into a consumer culture, instant gratification, that's saying there, if it feels good, do it, kind of the 60s instant gratification. And this economic idea that I'll actually explain a little bit. No regulations, right? Just let the market do what it will and it'll all work out great. Kind of sounds like objectivism, right? Ayn Rand probably wrote that. She didn't, but it sounds like her. And this is a little bit more recent, 70s into the 1980s. This Powell Memorandum, which nobody's probably ever heard of, said, you know what, the business of America is business. Fine, right? Business is a big piece. Jobs, economic prosperity, making stuff that people need, right? But business isn't the only thing. And when we make it so, bad things can happen. Right? I'm going to skip that. So, just to go back, the reason I put this on there is just to really show the slope. Because this cuts off in, 2010? I think it is. Where am I? Comes out of a business textbook. But you can see, in general, our debt wasn't out of control. But if we hit the 1980s, we start to really deficit spend. It starts with Ronald Reagan, and military spending to try to really win the Cold War, right, against the Soviet Union. There's a small break here under the Clinton administration because the Cold War ends, so we don't have to spend as much, and then it just keeps going into overdrive. And that line just keeps going up and up and up. And you saw that number. Here it was 18 trillion. Now it's almost 30 trillion. Just 11 years from 2010. Yikes. Scary. And you can look at this. There's a thing called GDP. It's like I'm going to simplify it, but the amount of stuff, goods and services in a given year that the United States produces. And one of the things people look at is the debt, that almost 30 trillion, and GDP, how much we make in a year. And the point of this slide is to show the relationship between the two. Anytime I show you guys a chart, look for where did it come from. The Congressional Budget Office and the Office of Money and Budgeting, I think it is. That was the Office of Budgeting. Anyhow, these are government agencies that are fairly credible. But you can see at the end of World War II, we were just over 100%. We were spending more than we were making in a year, but not by a lot. If you go back and look at the debt clock, we're in the, I want to guess, about 115 to 116% range. And we're not at war anymore. And so where is all this money going? That we're spending more and more and more, much more than we even make in a given year. So you can see that kind of dampens out. This is more than normal down here, that we make a whole lot more than we spend. Some of that was on Trump and his tax cuts. Some of that was on Obama bailing out the banks from the mortgage meltdown. So no one party's either totally to blame or their hands are clean. That's not the case. Everybody has a piece in that puzzle. Okay, so some background piece. Now let's look at this economy, right? This consumer base. 70, sometimes up to 75% of our U.S. economy is based on consumers, us buying stuff, right? Dishwashers, food, cars, whatever it is. And so what you get is this consumer-based economy is a flow. And I think this makes sense and will help you understand when things are going up and things are going down. So let's just start over here, jobs. Because if the economy's, let's put it this way, what do you hear politicians campaign on? I don't care who they are. Jobs, jobs, jobs. This will bring in many good paying jobs. Okay? So let's start with that, just in this cycle. You could start anywhere. With a job, what do I get from a job? Besides, especially if it's a career, satisfaction of, but I get paid to do it. So now I have money to spend. So now I can go out and buy stuff, right? And I kind of crassly call it buy crap at Walmart, right? But you get the point. You go out and buy stuff. And so if people are buying a lot of X, whatever it is, widgets, cars, then that demands, eventually I have to increase production to keep up with the demand, the consumption. So when production increases, to build more cars, what do I need? Well, more robots. Probably need more people, though. More jobs, more money, more consumption. And you can see how this consumer-based economy can spiral upwards. And things are good at that point. But the downside is when we start shedding jobs, and if you go back to the mortgage meltdown, it was, what, 700,000 jobs a month were being lost as the economy completely collapsed because of malfeasance by Wall Street. So we start losing jobs, less money, consumption goes down, people are saving it. You're only buying the absolute bare necessities, your needs. Thus production's going to go down because people aren't buying those cars like they used to. And you can see how that jobs go down, less money, how it can spiral downwards as well. So I think that helps understand a little bit about the ebbs and flows. And that's why I spent a little time on economic stuff at the beginning. Now there's two things that can kind of supercharge this consumer cycle. One is advertising. And that was a relatively new phenomenon at the turn of the last century. Not new, but advertisers were usually like, here's our product, here's what it can do. Not very exciting. But as we get into the era of radio, and then certainly of television, and now you carry a thing around that constantly reminds you to buy that can of paint you looked at 6 weeks ago, advertising can supercharge the consumer cycle. It makes you, it changes things you want into things you think you need, and we've been over that before. The other is credit. I can give you a credit card and now you can spend more money than you actually have. Now that has a limit, doesn't it? Because eventually you're going to run out of credit. Okay? So that's the concept of a consumer economy. Boy, this is getting a little. Let me just hit a couple ideas. This comes from Investopia, right? It's a website about investing. The invisible hand was the idea that if we leave the market alone, the market, whatever it might be, the economic system really, alone, that the forces, these invisible concepts, the invisible hand, will make sure things work out right. Okay, we don't need the government intervening. Okay, well, yes and no. I mean, I get the idea of leave us alone. There's excess government oversight, absolutely, but the government is involved, and yet we still have this lack of regulation. And so I listed a few, and you can look them up if you want. Enron, the mortgage meltdown, Wells Fargo, VW, Global Crossing. These businesses that acted unethically banked a lot of money maybe in the upside, but then something happened. They got caught. And like Enron, it went out, it was $1 billion company, went out of business in about 6 weeks. And the thing is, it took all the retirement accounts of the people that worked there with them. So I've spent 35 years, in the energy sector. And now all of a sudden, these two guys running the company, Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling, are unethical, are criminal. The company collapses. My 35 years of retirement money is gone. Like that. So that's why, to me, the invisible hand, okay, but there should be logical and informed government, I don't know if the word's intervention or guidelines or whatever it is, to keep unethical people from acting that way. Wells Fargo, 2 million fake bank accounts. VW, I talked about, I think, the emissions cheating scandal. Right? It goes on. And not all companies are like that. But the invisible hand combined with some sensible regulation and punishment that goes with it. That's the other piece. Oh, here we go, rant, tangent. How many people went to jail for the mortgage meltdown, which brought this country to its knees? Nobody. Don't get caught with marijuana in your car, though. So where does all this come from? This idea of ethics, morals that we've talked about in the last worksheet. Some of it's puritanical, right? The original folks coming to the country to seek religious freedom. So you had that. We had a great awakening after the winning of the revolution, where religion really spread around the country in different forms. It wasn't just puritanical. But we've seen that decline. The increase in number is no religious affiliation, and less and less people actually go to church. Now, I don't think you have to go to church to be a decent person, but I certainly wouldn't stop. My wife's Southern Baptist. I go with her occasionally. I don't see anything wrong with it. Certainly, there's some ideas that come from religious texts that are part of our system of laws, right? Thou shalt not kill. That's where some of our laws come from, isn't it? And so with this decline in other things that, maybe bound us together before, we've seen political identity kind of fill that bill. This us versus them, right? Republicans versus Democrats. This wealth inequality argument. And you can see some of the numbers. The top 1% have 32% of the overall wealth of this country. And the top 1% have now 16 times more wealth than the bottom 50%. There's all kinds of stats out there. Look, there's some really rich people out there, right? This was a little bit dated because now, what's his name? Elon Musk, has supplanted Bill Gates. But Jeff Bezos, right? These people that are super rich. Look, Jeff Bezos with Amazon, he suffered through that company not making money for a long time. It's kind of a genius idea, and I bet everybody out there has used Amazon in some form or fashion. But how much is enough, I guess, is the question. And if you say, well, we should pay our employees more, or you argue for a minimum wage, well, then the socialism label starts to come out. Seems to me, if we're all in this together, that if you work a 40-hour a week job, you shouldn't have to use food stamps. And it wasn't all that long ago that Walmart, when you applied and you worked full time, they showed you how to get on the government website to apply for food stamps because their pay was so bad. Now there's been a little bit of a groundswell where you see some places now going, $10, $15 to start. Wonderful, but it shouldn't have taken as long as it did, right? Pay people what they're worth instead of paying the CEO 600 times what the average employee makes. Here's an experiment. I think it's close. I saw it maybe a year ago. If you close your eyes for 10 seconds, close your eyes, count to 10. That's how long it took Jeff Bezos to make as much as the average Amazon employee makes in a year. So every 10 seconds he's making what the average employee makes in a year. It's my opinion, but to me that's out of whack. Does he deserve more? Absolutely. Does he deserve that much more? That's a tough question, isn't it? Because who decides? Some people will say, Breaky, shut up, you socialist. That he deserves everything he can get. Okay. Isn't that part of the split we see in our country, though? Part of the anger. And being a 58-year-old, I've seen it change. But it seems to me you and I and the average Joes of the world are really trying to compete for a smaller and smaller piece of the pie because the upper couple percent are taking all of it. And we get a few crumbs they brush off. Here, good luck, hope you survive on those. Is that overstated? Of course it is. Do I do that? Of course I do. So getting kind of toward the end here. Again, this was kind of a thought. What binds us? What tears us apart? This idea of compromise, that we each give a little bit to get a common result. Nobody gets everything, but we get something that works for both of us. That's been on the decline. But older folks, this survey said, you know what? I still think there is the ability to compromise. I do too, and I think some of that would happen more if we got rid of some of the old heads in the government. That our Congress should have term limits so that we don't have somebody there for 50 years obstructing what's going on. But the interesting piece to this was how the younger folks saw it. You, if you're in that 18 to 29-year-old group, have kind of grown up with this polarized, uncompromising, dysfunctional country. And so you see the percentage, 48% of young adults say political disagreements are nothing new, and there's a bigger rift in the country than just that. And here's just an example of the number. Bills passed, but sitting, right? You can do the math. A whole lot of them, they've got to go through both houses to get to the president's desk. So the Senate would just sit on them. If they didn't like them, the House might have said, the House is supposed to be our house, right? It's the bigger group. The Senate would just sit on it and nothing happens. And I could go on and on and on. You guys would turn me off. So I'm going to shut up on that. Look, here's what I see. Thinking about some of the pieces of this. There was an article that came out 2 years ago now, and it was called Deaths of Despair. And these two researchers, it was a husband and wife team, and they looked at populations and they saw, as we would expect, life expectancy, because this was just before the pandemic, but in general, life expectancies were going up because we had better medicine, better treatment, things like that. But they found in all that data that one group, my group, middle-aged white men from like 45 to 65, actually their life expectancies were falling off and falling off dramatically. And they found out why was they were overly using opioids, alcohol, suicide, all the above, because they were despairing at what they saw going on with their country, the country that they'd grown up in. And I can empathize. I see it. It's not the country it used to be, and some of that's for the better, but some of it's damn sure for the worse, right? The Blue Star video is a long video. It's like 45 minutes long, but it is a 6-month in the making documentary about the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And it was not a normal tourist day in Washington. This is body camera footage from police, a lot of it. So it's not faked. It's not fake news. And look, it's hard to watch, but it's worth watching. If you want to get to, here's what was going on. How do you fake what's on the videos. Look at the people. Look what they look like. Look what they're carrying. Okay? And you see it, man. Mask wearing. It's like everything is political now. Those people. Let's blame all our problems on somebody else, right? So let's kind of try to wrap this up. Freedom and liberty. I can do anything I want. I hear that argument, and it usually revolves around masks or COVID, whatever. Sure, you have a choice, absolutely. But can I do anything I want? The answer is no. There's limits to our freedoms. And so let's talk about, maybe it's out of order, but in the First Amendment, freedom of speech, I can say anything I want. The answer is no. There's certain caveats to that you can't. One of them is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't say something that's going to hurt public safety. Right? You can't slander somebody. Right? Say something completely false that harms them. And the written form of that would be libel. Right? You can get sued for that. Of course, you can do it, but you're going to pay some consequence. And the last is you can't say anything that's deemed obscene. And that's sort of a moving target because who decides that? So the answer is no. There are limits to our freedom. And I want to talk about that harm principle as we wrap up. If you watched it, and I hope you did, the videos on the social dilemma, that idea of a common culture, that go back through all these slides. Do we have one unifying thing beyond that we're Americans? Not really. But we're kind of all in this together, and we like the idea of opportunity. We like the idea of working hard to get where you want to go. But it seems to me all these pieces above that we were talking about are tearing apart any remnants of common culture, that we're becoming more and more and more polarized. And that polarization seems to center around politics. And man, that didn't used to be the case at all. I mean, people, one, they really didn't talk about who they voted for. They just did it, right? And if your guy lost, you supported the other one. If your guy won, great. You know, he stands for more of what I believe in. But it wasn't this fight to the death idea. All right? So here it is, the harm principle. It comes from a guy named John Stuart Mill. I got the book on the shelf over here, On Liberty. He was talking about that, yes, we have freedom, we have liberty, but there's limits to it, just like the limits to the freedom of speech. It says the harm principle, which he wrote it after the Constitution, like in the 1820s. So it's been around a while, but it's a cornerstone of a lot of our laws and how we see things. That you can do pretty much whatever you want in this country up until it starts to hurt other people. In other words, a person can do whatever they want as long as they don't hurt somebody else. Okay? You can sit in your house and drink a six-pack. Go ahead. Right? It's not good for you. You're hurting yourself, but as soon as you get behind the wheel of a car, now you can do harm to other people. That's where the problem comes in. Okay? And I personally would argue that when mask mandates were flying around, that, okay, you don't want to wear one, don't. But don't go into Walmart either, because your actions can harm other people. Right? And, I hear this, oh, Fauci doesn't know what he's talking about. Look, this was a moving target. We didn't know what we didn't know about the COVID virus. And so, yes, things did change, but they tried to change. I don't think anybody was out to get anybody else, right? Jesus, if wearing a mask is beyond something you're willing to do, how the hell are we ever going to fight? Think about the guys, on Iwo Jima. Here we go, tangent. Look, it's 48 minutes. God bless. Guy, General Milley, right? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was being asked questions just recently about his writings about, he thought former President Trump was kind of losing, the cheese was coming off his cracker, and he was concerned right up there as the election was coming to pass. And he was asked about it by Congress. And one of the congressmen asked him, why didn't you resign? Right? If you don't believe in the former president and what he's doing, why didn't you resign? And he looked at him, and this is the best answer. He said, my father didn't have a chance to resign when he was charging up the hill on Iwo Jima. His dad was a World War II veteran. He said, I'm not going to resign. That's the coward's way out. Man, it was a great answer, right? We need more people like that. wearing a mask. It's like it's the end of the freaking world to put a mask on. If it affects you, you can do what you want. Okay? And I'm going to skip this part just for sake of time. There's principles involved with it, but just understand the harm principle. Your freedoms, yeah, you've got a lot of them, but they don't go forever. You start hurting other people, those freedoms get squished, right? Because we're all in this together. It's not just 330 million individuals in this country. I'm going to skip this one too. You guys can look it up if you want. It's an interesting idea, the Durkheim constant, and how culture slowly can erode over time. Let's look at this quickly. I think this is probably one of the last slides. This is called the political spectrum, and I just want you guys to be aware. I'm not trying to convince you to be a Republican or a Democrat. The idea of left and right. When they talk about the left on the news, it's Democrats, they're liberal, their symbol's the donkey. Media-wise, those are three of the big channels. So is the New York Times as far as the press. And their platforms generally on taxes and regulations up. More taxes so they can do what they want. More regulation to constrain businesses from acting badly. Okay. On the other side, Republicans, the GOP, the grand old party, they're on the right. They're conservative, elephant. Their media channels, Fox, One American News, Newsmax. Taxes and regulations less, that we should keep more, we should let the companies do what they want. Again, you can see there should be a balance there. But oftentimes we say, oh, they spend less. No, both sides spend, right? It's just a matter of, do we tax to pay for it, or do we not tax and run up a deficit? And so, look, conservative, the whole idea here, conservative liberal means change quickly, liberal, change slowly, conservative. Both sides believe that's what's best for the country. Neither side is full of bad people. Liberals think that more change and rapid change will make the country better. Conservatives say, whoa, not so fast. Okay? But what's happened is that idea, which you can see how those two can compromise, has now become so polarized that instead of here toward the middle, it seems like everybody's way out on either side, and talk to the hand if you don't believe what I'm saying. All right? And think about this, as the presidential races, even congressional races, a lot of people vote by party. They go in and vote Democrat, they go in and vote Republican. Doesn't matter who the candidates are. So that's 70% total, 35% on each side. 10% tend to lean or favor a party, so they generally vote liberal or conservative. Now we're up to 90%, right? So that leaves about 10% of folks that they call swing voters, that they vote based on who they think the best candidate is. That's me. And if I can get just 6 or 7% and leave my opponent 3 or 4%, that's all it takes to win an election. And that's why you see so many of the elections lately are pretty razor thin margins. Okay. The last two presidential elections, maybe not so much. I mean, the Electoral College kind of over amplifies that, but so be it. Liberal or conservative, fast, slow change. Not bad people. Think that's what's best for the country. So how do we find truth? This is a good way to wrap it up. I think we understand history. That's part of the journey we've traveled. Understand definitions. Seek credible sources. Okay? PBS over Fox or CNN? Yes, please. Do not believe what you hear, see, read without proof. Unfortunately, that's the case. But we tend to. If we see something and read it, we tend to believe it. If it sounds too good to be true, probably is. Okay? Look at the person's agenda. Is it Dr. Wheezy, who's working for the tobacco industry? Facebook's agenda is making money off you. You are Facebook's product, by the way. Okay? Repetition is not the same as fact. So use your knowledge. Convert that into wisdom. Do some digging. Don't just believe Tucker Carlson. Right? In fact, don't believe him. Argue with facts. I still think facts win the day. I hope. Maybe it's a vain hope. And it's the user, not the device. But if you watch The Social Dilemma, you saw how this thing is programmed to keep your attention. Right? So it's a tough battle. Okay? And this, I'll kind of wrap up with this. I don't see the internet as a friend. I don't even see it as being benign. I think it can be dangerous and has to be controlled. the user, not the device. Don't believe everything you read, for the love of God. Okay? Fact check. Let's end on a high note. Yes, please. This comes from Jimmy Carter from the great state of Georgia, giving this speech called The Crisis of Confidence. And the country was in bad shape. I mean, I was 16 years old at this point. We had the Iranian hostage crisis. The economy was bad. And he got on TV and talked for almost an hour to the country. And you could tell he was mad. His body language, the words he used. He said, we're losing our confidence. We're losing the trust in the pillars of our society. And he listed them. Schools, churches, the press, families. They're crumbling. Are they still? Do those things carry our trust still? Some yes, some no, maybe. What about the presidency? That really started coming unglued with Nixon and Watergate, but even before that with Vietnam. Okay? He said in this speech that most Americans think the next 5 years will be worse than the past 5 years. And I've heard that same sentiment today, right? And for the past 5 or 6 years I've heard that. And he kind of ended with this: we as a nation have two paths. And I think this is profound. One of the smartest things, Jimmy Carter was a smart guy. He didn't play well with others sometimes in the presidency, but anyhow. He said, one path I've warned about tonight, the path that leads to fragmentation and self-interest. Down that road lies a mistaken idea of freedom, the right to grasp for ourselves some advantage over others. That path would be one of constant conflict between narrow interest ending in chaos and immobility. It is a certain route to failure. Hopefully that gels some of what I've talked about in your head. This idea of rampant individualism, of polarization, of objectivism, that pure selfishness works. No, that there is some of this, we're all in it together. But he said, here's another thought. All the traditions of our past, all the lessons of our heritage, those ideals, all the promise of the future point to another path. Common purpose and the restoration of American values. That path leads to true freedom for our nation and ourselves. And so I have to ask you, which path did we choose in 1979? Boy, it sure seems like we chose path one, because all those things have come to pass. Common purpose, restoration of American values. And that doesn't mean they're uniform and everybody believes the same thing, but those ideas of hard work, of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, of working together, right? Of seeing each other as valuable, not as an impediment to my progress or to grasp what it is I want. Yeah, that is kind of preachy, but I think we still have the chance to take path two that Jimmy Carter talked about. I truly believe it. If I didn't, well, let's leave it at that. Okay, so that wraps up step 4. So did that have anything to do with research? Probably not. But it was supposed to be a thought experiment, and I know my opinions creep in at times, but there by no means was this supposed to convert you to thinking the way I do. I just want you to think about it. All right, how do we get to the truth in this age of social media? So step 5, we'll get some more time management. We'll talk about multitasking, which is really a myth, and some money management, right? How to manage your money. Okay? So 2 worksheets. There's a time management worksheet, and then there's what's called the topic outline, which is really just an outlining exercise, but it'll help start pointing us toward developing a 10-minute presentation. That'll just be slides you send to me that you would have presented had we been in class. Okay? End of step 5, we'll have a quiz, and that puts us at Thanksgiving break. That means we come back, have a week of classes, and then the final exam, and we're donezo. So it ain't too far off. Hang in there. Use the Thanksgiving break to recharge your batteries, but maybe get a few things done over that break as well, and come back with your foot on the floor to finish up week 7 in the final exam. Okay? All right. I hope, it gave you a couple things to think about, if nothing else, is my hope. And I will see you next video.